My apologies. I had planned to finish off ancient Rome without shutting down again, but I had a technical difficulty, so we're back to do the last bit on ancient Rome. The Romans' virtual official philosophy was Stoicism, which actually goes all the way back to the Greeks. But the Romans sort of took Stoicism and ran with it, kind of adapted it to their own uses and to their own way of life, which we know is somewhat different than the Greeks. And so there was never any official religion of Rome, but it kind of grew to be the most popular religion of Rome, not the only one. So I should say, did I say religion? It's more of a philosophy, and the philosophy here during this period and beyond is less about knowing the truth. There's a bit of that in there. It's more of sort of being able to deal with life's difficulties and challenges. So in some ways, philosophy, in Stoicism here, Epicureanism, others at the time, are kind of like self-help philosophies. But in some ways, all good philosophy is self-help. How to live life, right? How to find the good life. How to live well. Right? How to achieve human flourishing, as Aristotle said. So Roman Stoicism was sort of the philosophy to the Romans, and it functioned somewhat like a religion in some ways. Perry says Roman Stoics saw the universe as governed by reason, and they esteemed the human intellect. They sought the highest good in this life, not in an afterlife, and envisioned no power above human reason. So, again, a very appealing philosophy, particularly to Roman leaders, members of the upper class, advocated by Cato, the younger, at least mentioned, Cicero, who I didn't mention before, but one of the great lawyers, writers, intellectuals in Roman history, and Seneca, who we'll meet. Or we meet. I might have taken that slide out. Sometimes Seneca is sort of thought of as the only Roman philosopher. Like the Greeks had hundreds of them. Seneca was a gifted individual. But what is Stoicism? Well, at least the original Greek version, and this is still basically true of the Roman type, is about finding a way to not get overly emotional, to keep an even keel. In fact, the word is still around today. If you hear someone called stoic, oh, so and so is very stoic, it means they don't show emotion, whether sort of highs or lows. They don't get overly excited if something good happens, and they don't get overly upset if something of a misfortune happens to them. They maintain an even keel. Now, whether or not they're feeling those things inside is another story, though I think Stoicism, if done correctly, at least the thought is that you not only just you don't just hide it from people, you actually don't have those sort of extremes of emotions. You found a way to keep your calm and cool and head about you, no matter what the situation. I think we can see how that would be in a feeling philosophy in Rome, and really anywhere else, for that matter. And especially for high-pressure jobs like being the Emperor of Rome. Oh, we do have one on Seneca. So, Rome's only philosopher. I thought I'd taken this slide out. I change things around sometimes. Seneca's, in a book that includes some quotes from Seneca, but also comments on him, the author says, Marianne Shelton, says Seneca was a disciple of Stoic philosophy. He and his fellow Stoics believed that all men are equal inasmuch as all men are citizens of the universe, preached compassion and humane treatment toward slaves, which doesn't sound like much to us, because, of course, slavery is just an evil, as it is. But in the ancient world, since there were hardly, and in the Roman world, hardly anyone was saying anything even close to, treat your slaves with humanity and compassion, it does say something in Seneca's favor that he was one of the few to see them as, suffering human beings, and, admonishing those who didn't do so to treat slaves well or better. He actually said at one point, Seneca, that when he went to like gladiatorial contests, the gladiator games at the Colosseum, he said when he came back, he that he got addicted to these kind of things, but he realized that they were dangerous, or believed they were, because whenever I come home from those kind of things, I'm more cruel, I'm less humane, I'm more they influence me in a bad way, which is a very insightful thing for someone to say about something like that. So this is just one example of this guy's sort of insightful philosophy. And he said then, I'm now not just paraphrasing but quoting, "There's nothing more harmful to one's character than attendance at some spectacle." He means like gladiatorial games. Because vices creep into your soul more easily while you are being entertained. When I return from a spectacle, I'm greedier, more aggressive, and more addicted to pleasurable sensations. I'm more cruel and inhumane. So there it is from Seneca himself. I forgot that I had the quote on there as well. So I said, considering the pressure that Roman leaders are under, particularly the emperor, and especially if he's out on a military campaign, we aren't surprised then, or shouldn't be, to find that there was a Roman emperor who practiced Stoicism big time, and actually wrote a book of Stoic philosophy called the Meditations, and that emperor is this guy Marcus Aurelius. While commanding troops engaged in fighting, plundering tribesmen in the Balkans, he wrote in Greek the Meditations, a classic work of Stoic thought. In Stoicism, he sought the strength to overcome the burdens of ruling an empire, the fear of death, and the injustices and misdeeds committed by his fellows. So, in some ways, I think you can say fairly safely, since he wrote this apparently while he was out on military campaign, I don't mean while the battle was going on, but like at night afterwards, that he wasn't just writing this, if at all, for other people to read and get the benefit of Stoic philosophy, but he might have been writing it primarily, at least at first, as sort of a self-help mechanism to sort of calm himself for another day of chaotic battle and danger in the middle of a war. But it's a good example, since he's famous and was powerful, of the appeal of Stoicism to the Romans. Another influential philosophy that also was kind of handed down from Greece, so another part of that cultural connection between the Greeks and the Romans, Greco-Roman culture, Stoicism, and now Epicureanism as well. You have Lucretius, a Roman, who wrote a blockbuster poem, but a long one, called "On the Nature of Things." And the founder of Epicureanism was a Greek, but this guy was a practitioner later on in Rome. This is a radical poem in a decidedly moderate culture. So this is incredible. This came out, in the Roman Empire. The poem shows a very materialistic view of the universe and questions very much traditional religious belief of any sort. So, in a sense, this is kind of a work of atheism. That's a bit too strong and a bit of an anachronism, but for lack of, so we don't have to go into this forever. He's kind of like an ancient atheist, which there weren't very many of. The gladiatorial contests, we've probably seen the movie Gladiator itself, and a lot of people are interested in this specific feature of Roman culture and society, if you can call it culture. And the gladiatorial games may have had a functional nature to them. The entertainments as a whole, circuses and chariot racing, etc. The social value of bread and circuses, which is actually it was a Roman phrase. What functional nature, meaning sort of what function do these things serve in the larger society? Was it just entertainment? Possibly, but it's possible this was sort of diversionary. that if you're a poor, struggling Roman, and you're, otherwise you'd be angry at the government, for your lot in life, and might be inclined to plot and be involved in a rebellion against Rome. That if you have just enough money in your pocket to afford to go to the gladiator contest and the chariot races, that you'll be diverted and entertained, and just happy enough to not do any of those things that might threaten Rome. So there's some evidence that this may have been the case. Even if it wasn't intended that way, it certainly had that effect. The third makeover comes kind of in the years you see here, when back-to-back two emperors recognized that Rome was in a state of serious problems and decline, Diocletian and Constantine. In fact, it had been in decline for a while. It's just these are the first two emperors paying enough attention or astute enough to know it and realize it and do something about it. Emperors by this time in Rome were ruling with increasing pomp. Pomp and circumstance, the phrase often used, kind of means they're being more showy about their rule as leaders, dressing to the hilt, making people defer to them in more formal and informal ways. You weren't supposed to even look at these emperors. You go in to see them and they'd be behind a screen, and you could talk to them, but you weren't supposed to even see them. So that's something Augustus would have never done. Never. Right? He didn't call himself an emperor, and he tried to play down the fact that he was the emperor. So this is kind of much more, in a sense, in-your-face rule by emperors. But remember, this is now hundreds of years after Augustus's own reign. But these guys came in, realized that Rome had numerous problems: political, economic, cultural, religious, and tried to institute and did institute some serious reforms. Whether they worked or not is difficult to ascertain. They expanded the army, made strategic, tactical changes to it. They took state control of labor, increased taxation, imposed price controls, and so they really tampered with the economy in a big way. And so this, by our standards today, whether it was seen that way then or not, it's harder to say. I'm sure it was by some, but that they're taking a real chance by intervening in the economy that much. Good work, but it could very much backfire, and it's possible that it did. The empire did stay alive for quite some time after this, and showed some vigor even for a time after this, but that doesn't necessarily prove that it was because of the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine. In fact, we don't know for sure that if Diocletian and Constantine hadn't put these things and more types of reforms in place, the empire would have thrived even more than it did. But though it doesn't appear that that's the case. And also, as part of reform, in a different way, in the cultural sphere, we see a revolutionary move toward Christianity under the Emperor Constantine. Reconquering the empire as Christian, which we'll get to in a later unit when we talk about the rise of Christianity itself. But so these two emperors tried to patch up many of the problems in a declining empire, and they may have succeeded in keeping it alive for a longer period of time, but again, it's unclear. So why did the Roman Empire finally fall and in the way that it did? I'm going to keep this simple here. You can go back and kind of look at this stuff on your own. The civil strife part of it we don't need to really get into. I'm just going to say sort of two things. Keep it, again, very simple. The Roman Empire collapsed from pressure from the outside, mainly in the Germans, the Germanic tribes, barbarian tribes that had been a thorn in the Roman side on their northern borders for centuries, and from internal problems and crises. So the Roman economy was in the doldrums. Roman respect for the gods and moving to new and popular religions sort of helped, I think, to fragment Roman opinion. Remember, religion is always really good social glue. And so once belief in the Roman gods, who had been the Greek gods primarily before, started to wane, it may have sort of weakened the social glue somewhat. So it's a combination. The fall of Rome is explainable through a combination of pressure from the outside, from the German tribes, usually of a military, warlike sort, and a weakened Rome internally, which made it then harder and harder to defend against German invasions. And the Germans, one German tribe after another, they weren't always in coordination. In fact, they usually weren't coordinating their attacks, but sacked Rome on one or more occasions, started taking more and more Roman territory, sometimes, temporarily, sometimes for good. And depending on what year you pick, Rome fell around 500 AD. So the entire history of ancient Rome, about a 1,000-year period, that's a long time for an empire to succeed and thrive before it collapses. But it finally did go down, although the first German emperors that basically got into Rome and got a hold of the machinery of government appear to have tried to have sort of propped the empire back up themselves, just with German emperors instead of Roman ones. And why wouldn't they? Since they could, easily see that Rome in some ways is still a gold mine. And if I can just sort of take over power, the structures of economic structures, political, and so forth are already there, then why not? But after a time, that didn't work, and so the German influence overran Rome, and Roman influence and the whole Roman Empire collapsed. And we are done.